Ask 100 people to name Earth's scariest era, and almost all of them will say, the age of dinosaurs. Fair enough, a T-Rex is nightmare fuel, but here's a secret paleontologists rarely get to share. The dinosaurs were actually living in a relatively mellow chapter of Earth's history. If you want true horror, you have to travel back further to a world that existed before a single dinosaur ever took a step. A world where the deadliest hunters weren't reptiles, weren't dinosaurs, and technically weren't even fully mammals either. Welcome to the Lopingian, the final stretch of the Permian Period, and quite possibly the single worst 8 million years to be a land animal in the entire history of our planet. A world you wouldn't recognize. The Lopingian ran from roughly 259 to 252 million years ago, and almost nothing about that Earth resembles the one we live on now. Start with something as basic as a day. The Moon, back then, orbited noticeably closer to Earth, and that proximity sped up our planet's spin. A full day-night cycle clocked in at around 22 hours instead of 24. Meaning creatures back then technically lived through more days per year than we do. Geography was just as alien. Nearly every scrap of land on the planet, what would eventually become Africa, the Americas, Antarctica, India, Australia, and chunks of Europe, was welded into one gigantic supercontinent, Pangaea. Only a handful of true islands existed outside it, floating in the east. A landmass made of modern Siberia, Kazakhstan, and northern China. Another combining southern China with pieces of Southeast Asia, and a scattered trio, Turkey, Iran, and Tibet, bobbing between the Tethys and Paleotethys seas. Panthalassa, a sea bigger than the Pacific, but all of that water was dwarfed by what lay to the west of Pangaea. Panthalassa, a single super ocean that swallowed more than 60% of the entire globe. To put a number on it, Panthalassa was roughly double the surface area of today's Pacific, the largest body of water Earth has ever hosted, before or since. You'd expect an ocean that massive to be crawling with monsters, and for once, the sea actually took a breather. The legendary buzzsaw shark Helicoprion, famous for its spiral of teeth curling out of its lower jaw like a circular blade, had already gone extinct by this point, despite being a poster child for Permian oceans. Its surviving cousins, the Eugeniodontids, were shadows of that legacy. The largest known species barely stretched past 2 meters, roughly leopard shark length, and its teeth were built for slicing soft-bodied squid, not crushing bone. Other contemporary sharks, like the Hybodontids, rarely exceeded a meter. Even the sea scorpions, Eurypterids, once titans of earlier Paleozoic seas reaching over 2 meters long, had crashed down to just a couple of surviving, unremarkable genera, none holding any claim to apex predator status. Why the oceans went quiet. This marine mildness wasn't an accident, it was fallout. 2 million years before the Lopingian even began, the Capetanian mass extinction tore through the planet. It's one of the most under-talked about disasters in Earth's history. Yet by some measures, it was more destructive than either the extinction that killed the dinosaurs or the one that closed out the Triassic. Marine ecosystems bore the worst of it. Trilobites, ammonoids, and brachiopods limped through the Lopingian in reduced numbers, still recovering, never reaching their old diversity. For once, biology's usual rule, the ocean is scarier than land, had been flipped on its head. Land. Where the real terror, lived land recovered from the Capetanian extinction far faster than the sea did, and recovery in this case meant an arms race. The old dominant predators, a group called the Dinocephalians, had been wiped out, leaving a power vacuum. One lineage exploited that vacuum better than anything else on Earth, the Gorgonopsids. First described by scientists in 1876, Gorgonopsids were named after the Gorgons of Greek mythology, a fitting tribute considering what their skulls looked like. Long, narrow snouts, deep-set jaws, and oversized, blade-like canine teeth gave them an eerie resemblance to saber-toothed cats millions of years before cats even existed. But make no mistake, these were not mammals, and not reptiles either. They belonged to a group called therapsids, animals that sit on the evolutionary branch closer to mammals than to lizards, without technically being mammals themselves. Inostrancevia, the apex of apexes, Gorgonopsids started small. Some early species from 265 million years ago were no bigger than a human foot, hunting little amphibians and reptiles in the shadows. But as the Permian dragged on and rivals disappeared, they scaled up dramatically, culminating in the single largest Gorgonopsid ever recorded, Inostrancevia. This was the undisputed top predator of the late Permian landmass, estimated at over 3.5 meters long and topping 450 kilograms, roughly the mass of a large modern brown bear, though most individuals ran closer to tiger-sized. Its limbs were long and sturdy, built for real speed rather than ambush alone, letting it run down mid to large herbivores across open terrain. Once caught, prey faced upper canines up to 15 centimeters long, curved, serrated, and among the largest teeth ever documented in a non-mammalian therapsid. Paleontologists still debate its exact killing method. Some think it targeted the throat in a single decisive bite, similar to modern big cats. Others argue it favored a bite-and-retreat strategy, inflicting a wound and letting blood loss finish the job, much like how saber-toothed Smilodon may have hunted tens of millions of years later. What's genuinely wild is how far this animal traveled. Fossils of Inostrancevia have turned up not just in Russia, but as far away as South Africa. Evidence published in more recent research that after South African apex predators collapsed near the very end of the Permian, this Russian giant may have migrated across Pangaea and briefly filled the vacant throne there too, right before everything fell apart. It wasn't alone. Russia had company at the top. Smaller cousins like Proslavia and mid-sized hunters like Suchogorgon patrolled the same landscape, ensuring herbivores of every size had a Gorgonopsid as their primary threat. South Africa, meanwhile, had its own homegrown terror, the Rubigines, a subfamily of Gorgonopsids that independently evolved into some of the largest members of the whole group. Take Rubigia atrox, reaching 3 meters long, with a skull making up over 15% of its total body length, reinforced with thickened, bossed bone built for grappling large prey. Strangely, despite its size, bite force reconstructions suggest it clocked in around 715 newtons, only marginally stronger than a modern wolf's bite. The lethality wasn't brute force, it was precision. Those deeply serrated teeth were engineered to shred flesh with minimal effort, turning even a modest bite into a fatal wound. Beyond the Gorgonopsids, as terrifying as Gorgonopsids were, they didn't have a monopoly on horror. Theracephalians, another therapsid group, rivaled them in diversity if not always in size. Some, like the dog-sized Eucymbersia, are now suspected of having delivered venom through grooved teeth, which if confirmed would make them among the very first venomous land vertebrates in Earth's history, millions of years before venomous snakes existed. Then there was Mauserhinus, jaguar-sized with a disproportionately massive lion-like skull, believed to have pinned prey down with powerful forelimbs before finishing them off. So successful it may have replaced Gorgonopsids as the apex predator in parts of its range. Its more distant relative, Megawaitsia, may have taken venom delivery even further, with skull evidence hinting at venom glands used to bring down large decinodont herbivores. Rivers and lake margins weren't safe either. Giant amphibian relatives called rhinoceros lurked in South African waterways. The largest, Uranosentrodon, stretched over 4 meters, an ambush predator that made freshwater just as lethal as anything roaming dry land. A planet that wanted you dead, even before the predators, and the terrain itself wasn't merciful. Average global temperatures likely hovered around 35 degrees Celsius, nearly double today's average, fueling massive equatorial deserts and, in the north, an enormous mountain range cutting across Pangaea that choked off rainfall and deepened the drought. Life clustered wherever it could survive, mainly Russia and southern Africa, leaving vast stretches of the supercontinent essentially uninhabitable. Then, roughly 252 million years ago, all of it. The predators, the deserts, the fragile ecosystem still recovering from the Capetanian extinction collided with the single worst catastrophe in the planet's history, the Permian Triassic extinction, the Great Dying. Triggered by the eruption of the Siberian Traps, a volcanic event that buried an area the size of Western Europe under lava over a kilometer thick. The disaster pumped out enough carbon dioxide and sulfur to spike global temperatures, collapse oxygen levels, and, according to some studies, shred up to 5,000% more ultraviolet radiation through a badly damaged ozone layer. Scientists still use a rock section in Meishan, China, as the official global marker for where this boundary falls in the fossil record, and it shows the devastation in brutal clarity. 57% of biological families and 83% of genera vanished. For comparison, the extinction that ended the dinosaurs' reign wiped out only about 17% of families. The oceans, still recovering from the earlier Capetanian event, fared even worse this time, with warming, acidifying waters pushing marine life to the brink. So, next time someone tells you the age of dinosaurs was Earth's scariest chapter, remind them about the Lopingian, a world with 22-hour days, an ocean twice the size of the Pacific, saber-toothed hunters that weren't even mammals, and a climate actively trying to kill anything that crawled across it. It's proof that long before T-Rex ever roared, the planet had already perfected the art of terror. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.